Much of what we learn about science, nature, and the environment happens outside of school and beyond the walls of museums, zoos, and nature centers. I have worked as an independent environmental professional for many years and know there are others like me who interact with the public in communities worldwide. On the Talaterra podcast, we discover who these professionals are, what they do, and how they create change. Why do I focus on independent professionals? I focus on them because they move freely through communities. They move freely between schools, organizations, businesses, programs, and other informal learning environments. They are positioned to meet the public where they are, and this is powerful. Thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Tania Marien. Hello and welcome. Today it is my pleasure to introduce you to Emily Coren and Helen Wang, editors of a new book about storytelling and climate communication. Emily and Helen collaborated with 44 authors from diverse fields. The authors they worked with are affiliated with colleges, universities, news organizations, nonprofits, production companies, medical centers, the entertainment industry, and small businesses. They came together to create Storytelling to Accelerate Climate Solutions, a book that was published recently by Springer Nature. Each of the 20 chapters in the book addresses a specific type of storytelling. You'll find chapters about entertainment education, locally driven narratives, youth engagement, Hollywood, climate fiction, music, news reporting, geospatial tools, interactive storytelling, mental health, and the telling of stories through food. There is also a chapter about using visuals as a catalyst for climate science communication. Storytelling to Accelerate Climate Solutions is an open access book. You can download the entire book or individual chapters for free. You'll find a link in the show notes. Now let's drop into the conversation. We'll begin by learning more about Emily and Helen.
Hi, I'm Emily Coren. I'm a science communicator. I started off as a science illustrator. Now I do also science writing. I'm registered with the National Association of Science Writers and the Society of Environmental Journalists. And I'm also an affiliate at Stanford in the Psychiatry and Behavioral Science Department.
So my name is Hua Wang. I go by Helen. So I am a professor of communication in the Department of Communication at the University of Buffalo, which is part of the State University of New York, the SUNY system. So I've been there as a faculty member for 14 years. And prior to that, I studied at San Diego State University for my master's, looking at the role of technologies in facilitating communication processes. And then I obtained my PhD from the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. So it's been a journey, and I'm very happy. In my academic career, I've discovered the power of storytelling and have been able to use my training as a scholar, a researcher, and a teacher to contribute through different collaborative projects around the world. So it's been a wonderful journey.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a wonderful book. It is 20 chapters that covers all different types of climate storytelling. And like I've mentioned before, and what I've been telling people is it's a wonderful resource. How did you come to create this book?
I'm going to back up to where the topic became an interest for me. I was originally a genetic engineer studying Lepidoptera genetics, specifically Hox genes. And I got curious about how there was a logarithmic growth in scientific advancement and a linear progression in the cultural integration of science. And so it led me down sort of this rabbit hole path into science illustration. and then into science writing for trying to figure out how we could develop a systemization with science communication research to improve those two trajectory lines to better pair them. And about, I don't know, 5 years into that exploration, I was learning about entertainment education and doing a bunch of interviews with subject experts. And it became a topic of interest that climate change was probably the most practical application of that work. And so again, it kind of delved deeper into climate change communication. And so I ended up with this intersection between climate change communication and entertainment education. But nothing like this book had really been constructed yet. And one day I was at the American Geophysical Union and I had a friendly chat about it with Zach Romano, who was the staff support at Springer. And him and I agreed that it was an area of need. And that was sort of the work that eventually became this book.
Helen, how did the idea for this book come about for you?
Right. So I think Emily and I were connected through our mutual friend and colleague, Dr. Arvind Singhal, who graciously penned the preface for this book some years ago. I think, we have this shared interest in leveraging, I'd say, purposeful storytelling in entertainment media for positive change. And so we were connected through him some time ago. I think now I look back, she might have even shared some ideas about the chapter she wrote for the book, but maybe it was in the early stage. And then, we all got very busy. And so we didn't really connect at the personal level to talk about a more in-depth kind of a project together. And I think she reached out to me again after she already obtained the initial book contract. So this is after she met with Zach and says, there's the need in the field to connect people and share our knowledge and experiences. So she really invited me to be a co-editor, a partner, equal partner in this project. And in some way, I think the universe probably recognized this is a good opportunity and made it possible, given our schedules and priorities in life, that this is about maybe 3 years ago that I officially said yes. Because I didn't want to commit myself to a pretty elaborate project without knowing I actually can devote my efforts to a project like this. So I'm really grateful now looking back that she insisted on me being part of this project and really allowed me to help shape it up in terms of inviting additional authors from other fields and organizations, and not sort of limiting it to only North America or only the United States. And also in terms of formatting, the writing, and sort of coordinating between the chapter authors and the publisher and all these sort of intermediaries to kind of bring the book to the shape that it's, final format in the publication. So it's been sort of a co-learning journey, I would call it, that, we kind of knew about each other, but then we got to know each other much better through working together on this book.
What I love about this book, besides all the content, is that it is open access. It makes it easy to share. And I've shared the book. I've shared links to different individual chapters with people in the, 6 weeks that it's been out. And I've always wondered about the open access process. And speaking in general terms, what does this process look like from the author's perspective?
Yeah, it wasn't originally an open access book. But again, I think it was a suggestion from Zach, was that he thought that it would have broad support and that if we could figure out how to fund the open access, maybe we could try. So Helen and I started, reaching out to colleagues and research partners. And I think everybody agreed that it was an equity and inclusion measure that improved access for the content to the participants who are interested in climate change storytelling, and that this work is broadly applicable to everybody, and we didn't want it to be behind an academic paywall. And so everybody went that extra mile to make sure that the project had support.
I shared what I've learned from academic journal publication with open access, and the recent book on entertainment education that my colleagues Lauren Frank and Paul Felzon published in 2021, and how much of a sort of impact it made, being able to have open access, which means it's free of charge to anyone who has the internet and would be curious about this topic. And there's no time limit either. And that's tremendous for a cause that we're really working towards, right? And so I mean, I remember even when I first started publishing in open access academic journals, and I've had people I don't really know from, halfway around the world writing to me to say, I'm so thankful that your article is open access, because normally I wouldn't have been able to afford to pay to see or read your article, or I don't have any companies or institutions I belong to that has the access. So I understand how important it is. And we were able to talk to my colleagues and friends who did this open access fairly recently at that time, learned a little bit about the lessons and what worked very well for them. And then we kind of had a short list of potential sponsors, and we went about to secure the funding. And we are really grateful in terms of both individual and institutional supporters, especially the 5 sponsors we highlighted in the acknowledgement.
I just think that's it's a wonderful option to have. It's truly a gift. I have, of course, the free version. I have this printed version here that I'm writing all over the margins in, and I'm going to buy a second copy, I'm pretty sure. So I have a clean copy on the shelf.
I was surprised to note last night that it's already been downloaded 23,000 times.
That's fantastic.
I am grateful and astounded how much it's already being shared for the amount of promotion that we've done for it. And it's really encouraging for me. I feel like it's important work. And I think that it's fun to hear how people take the ideas and make them their own. I mean, I think part of the joy for me in creating this with all of the 44 chapter authors was hearing everybody's ideas. And if there's 23,000 people who've already read the work, I can only imagine, the iterations that this is going to take moving forward. And I think that that's really fun for me.
This book is about using storytelling as a tool to talk about our changing climate. What makes a good climate story?
That's a really good question. I feel like that's the $100 question, because that's sort of the whole point of the book. And I'm going to dive into that a little bit. But first, the short answer is focusing on stories set in the present, demonstrating personal and collective agency at climate solutions. I say that it's also helpful if the examples are specific and doable and combined with linked resources. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit before I go on to my examples. Agency is the belief that you can succeed at whatever task it is you're trying to do. And so sometimes I feel like with climate solutions, people feel disempowered. They feel worried that they don't know how to do the tasks, or they don't know where to start. And so stories that show people how people like them are already contributing, focusing on positive outlier examples that already exist, helps people find pathways in on their own. The examples need to be specific and doable. I think that also sometimes the instructions we give each other are too general or really confusing. And so having the stories unpack the details, I want to just talk about maybe putting a water heater on my own house, an electric one, I don't know what contractor to call. And if I try to sort through government websites for resource links, it's, an hour or two of research sometimes. And so sometimes having the stories be kind of shortcuts to show people where you are doing similar tasks with enough detail that it's repeatable can be really helpful in the stories. And sometimes that's better done not within your narrative, but within the linked resources. And so linked resources is the phrase that I'm going to keep coming back to. So I'm going to unpack a little bit about what that means. So the example that I want to give for entertainment education is that some of the early entertainment education work, and honestly, much of the contemporary work, is focused on reproductive health. It's one thing to show on screen condom use or, say, test often for sexually transmitted infections. But it's another thing entirely to have access to a link to Planned Parenthood in your neighborhood so that you can go and talk with a medical care provider and get access to tools for yourself. And so having a physical set of something that's connectable is a really critical infrastructure piece that I feel like is a challenge for the storytellers because there's too much weight put sometimes on the storytellers to generate those linked resources. When we look at structured entertainment education campaigns, research goes into developing what those linked resources look like and how they're distributed through usually transmedia campaigns, such as, something in your physical built environment or social media, so that people can find those resources quickly and efficiently. So let's talk about some of these story types. So I've got a couple different categories here for them. We're going to start with bad examples and gradually work them better. We're going to start with dystopian and then go to health impacts and then individual agency and then collective agency and then collective agency with linked resources. So one of the misconceptions that we see in climate change storytelling is stories that take place in the distant future to somebody else, whereas climate change is impacting us here now and impacts the communities we already live. So dystopian futures don't really ground those stories where we currently are. They kind of skip ahead to the future. So I want to try to pull people back to the present day in stories because that's where we can have the most current impact for really helping people mitigate and adapt to improve the climate impacts. But hypothetically, we're starting with a dystopian story. So it's hot here in California. We have heat waves. It's all over the news. Honestly, it's miserable. You're driving around. None of the electronics work. None of the electric charges work because everything's shut down in the heat. And so it's really a problem. So, for example, starting a story where people are dying of heat waves in the future, it doesn't really help us prevent them now. And since what I'm hoping for isn't a bunch of dead people, let's say that's not a great climate story if our outcome is improving outcomes now. So that's at least my goal. So let's reframe as present day stories. We're going to talk about health impacts next. Health impacts such as, challenges that people face from heat waves or wildfires or waterborne pathogens or insect spread diseases. All of those are completely valid health impact stories. And there should be some of that in the storytelling, but I want to say it's probably maybe like 10 or 20% of what the story touches should be. And while it's helpful to show what those health impacts are, I want to pivot really quickly to climate solutions. So if we have the same heat dystopian story, you could talk about current health impacts of heat waves. But then I would want you to pivot that to climate solutions. And that's where we're going to get to the next topic, which is individual agency. The next thing I see in storytelling is usually like a single lead protagonist story. And those are really effective at showing what one person is doing. And you can use them. You can improve that story by showing how people succeeded at whatever specific challenge that is. In our heat example, let's say people are suffering the heat and your protagonist could find shelter in a city cooling center or learning how to, and then assisting vulnerable, possibly elderly neighbors to install heat pumps or going to a cooling shelter during a heat wave. You could have a good individual story that's a success story that shows some of the positive behaviors. But you only have one of them. You have one perspective from one individual, which leads me on to the next subject, which is collective agency. So we're going to try the same thing, but now we're going to show many different characters working together in a variety of settings and roles to reduce urban heat islands by increasing the green space and switching the city to renewable energy sources. That collective agency story allows you to show more viewpoints and more entryways for people and behaviors for people to try. So we're going to go to our gold star example. I want to repeat that collective agency story, but now we're adding linked resources. So the program also has specific and doable behaviors that people are demonstrating in your, we're going to say city, but really setting, could be any setting you want. But that's linked to transmedia support, such as social media linked to the characters in your story, where you get to connect people for how to participate. So then if there's, some urban heat island reduction programs with multiple entry points. You can show all of them in your story. And you can provide the linked resources so that people can participate. And then I feel like I want to go one step further there, because the transmedia can do more, because so much of it is interactive these days. You can reincorporate in the storytelling examples of people participating in those actions. They can share them themselves. The platform really doesn't matter. I've seen it done over all sorts of formats. But people like to see themselves and relate to the characters and show how they're engaging with those actions. And now that we've gone from bad to best, I want to bring up Ed Maybach's phrase that he says very often. Clear, simple messages told often by a variety of trusted sources. So if that collective agency with linked resources example is our star example, I want to see many versions of it repeated in different formats over different media types, with different sets of complementary characters. It could be a spaghetti western. You could have a comedy. You could have something set in slightly different locations in a similar setting. And so that repeated actual behaviors piece allows you to see all of your favorite stories and shows and characters demonstrating the same set of skills in multiple ways. And connected to linked resources, I feel like then it doesn't matter where you start off or what kind of media you like or what kind of platform it's on. Everybody basically gets the same set of messages, and it's much easier to figure out what to do next.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things I've taken away from this book is a new appreciation for transmedia resources. I never thought about it in the perspective and the way that it is explained so beautifully in the book and the way that you have just explained it and talked about them. This whole book is about storytelling as a tool. So I was wondering, from your perspective, Helen, as a communication scientist, what is often missed when it comes to climate communication?
I think that's a really important question. And I would start with, why should we even care about using stories to communicate? I think, we kind of underestimate the power of good storytelling in everyday life, because, it's so invisible, so embedded in our experiences as human beings, even though we're kind of hardwired, or at least most of us as human beings are hardwired to love stories. We, we tell stories ourselves, and we try to make meaning through storytelling, with individuals and with the world. And I think a lot of us may not necessarily appreciate the kind of how the kind of stories we tell could shape who we are. So this is connected to addressing a particular issue like climate change. So if we're not conscious about the kind of stories we tell, then we may not be able to bring people together or bring people to the places where we think that can make a difference. So from the work I've been doing the last 15, 20 years, and I would admit mostly in sexual and reproductive health and rights space, and not climate communication per se, is that we know when scientists, health professionals, community leaders, and creative industry professionals work together, you can create really, really compelling, extraordinary stories and characters, and use these kind of narrative experiences to create conditions to facilitate positive change. So this is, I put quite a bit in terms of what has been done in the last couple decades. So in my field of communication research, there has been sort of increasing interest in terms of what's called narrative persuasion and narrative engagement. So how do we tell stories in particular ways that can facilitate positive outcomes that we desire, right? And I find myself more and more so in the kind of collaborations I do with communities. It's not necessarily to say I'm the expert. I come in and tell you from theory, from methods, from data, prescribe a solution, but rather to listen better, to facilitate conversations that might be difficult, and then to kind of work out a solution together with all stakeholders, and then to figure out what would be a good story that we all agree that can make an impact, a sort of meaningful social impact. So there's no formula to say, oh, you gotta, go on a particular network and use this length and have this mix of characters and, maybe some humor, maybe some horror. There's no kind of a universal formula to say this is a good story to address this issue. And it would be naive to say, oh, if I give you a list, let's say the to-do list, and you checked all the boxes and you would fix this problem. But I think what's more important is to understand what stories can do, especially good stories can do. And I think, it can really bring people together, and very often people from different relevant domains of a problem together that are otherwise may not be necessarily connected and be having a conversation at the same table. And also, what it can do, there are various types and levels of impact, engagement and impact. So sometimes a good story can really raise awareness, and people may not necessarily understand, but you can relate to a character or storyline and experience, and then all realize, this is such an important issue and I need to pay attention. Maybe I can do something about it. For some people, maybe you are very familiar, you even know the solutions, but then you can really leverage the power of storytelling to kind of activate, sort of what we call the latent ties. There are, maybe certain players that can make a difference right away. Maybe there are people who can amplify the voice that has not been heard. And there are maybe players that has the power to decide at a larger scale, such as policymakers. So good stories can really at least plant the seeds, if not to facilitate that transition into action, real change. And that's what I've seen in the work I've been doing. And, you can open up a conversation space, when it's a taboo topic using stories, and you can bring people together, working together towards specific goals. And you can use stories to share what's been working and sort of really, accelerate, the good solutions within certain contexts or communities. So there's no universal good story recipe. But I think when we understand the value of good stories and the power of good stories, then we can maybe engage in various efforts related to climate storytelling with more clear purpose and maybe a bit more mindfully in terms of how we're spending the time and what are the specific steps that would be useful, would be kind of transformative, potentially transformative. So that they can be better aligned in terms of from the start to finish, purpose, different choices in terms of partners, where you get the support, and how can you build a sustainable kind of network or community, and how do you track in terms of the progress and address certain issues, and then maybe share the knowledge and the experience and solutions, right? So I think it can serve a lot of purposes, a wide range of purposes, and also at different levels.
The solutions presented in this book are addressed through the lens of entertainment education. And on the surface, entertainment education is an easy concept to grasp. I was surprised by its formal definition and also by the extensive research in this field. And the definition that is in the book is a definition that comes from a paper that you co-wrote for a book titled Entertainment Education, Behind the Scenes, Case Studies for Theory and Practice. Could you explain how entertainment education is defined today and how its definition has changed over time? And as I understand correctly, this is a field that goes back some 50 years or so.
Oh, at least, yes. So it's been around for some decades. And we were just saying, we understand storytelling, is an essential part of a human experience. So it's been around for a long time. If you're thinking about the image of people sitting in a circle by the bonfire, sharing, certain kind of wisdoms through storytelling. So what's a bit different about entertainment education, or around the time when it became more or less a sort of a field of scholarship and practice, is that notion of purpose and collaboration, I would say. And so when we understand we can have very clear objectives, and there are certain attributes and mechanisms in storytelling, in narrative communication we could use to facilitate certain conditions that might provide more, have a higher chance of producing or creating conditions for desired positive outcomes, it becomes a field of itself. Rather than, I think, I want to tell a story or have a project about, combating obesity, for example. So there's a lot of sort of projects with good intention, but not necessarily informed by rigorous research, literature, experts, with very deliberate collaboration across various fields. So entertainment education came about through telenovelas in Latin America, and all the way sort of with the adaptation of various forms in North America. One of the examples would be Hollywood Health Society providing consultation to creative writers in Hollywood, for example, when they want to write storylines, be it long or short, about certain health or social issues. And so it's evolved. So I've been very lucky to be directly working with some of the pioneering researchers and practitioners around the world in entertainment education. And Dr. Arvind Singhal, my long-term collaborator and mentor, also kind of allowed me to make suggestions as how the field is evolving. If we're talking about entertainment media, communication technologies, social networks, and for various reasons, the definition has to acknowledge this evolution as well. So as when I was a PhD student in 2007, we started collaborating on various projects. And 2 years later, again, through a conference, we were able to write a chapter that was published in 2009, acknowledging entertainment education or storytelling in the context of digital games or interactive media. That's back then. And now we're looking at where we are. And so when we published this sort of updated definition, we wanted to point out a few things in terms of where we are in this journey, and also sort of alerting people not to kind of confuse between real world community oriented entertainment education projects with a lot of the more recent kind of lab-based basic research on, certain persuasion strategies, for example. And so people can use this term, it depends on who you talk to. Some might say, as long as it's an entertainment format with some kind of pro-social purpose, I would call it entertainment education. For somebody like me who has, been studying and teaching in this field for many years, I have these ongoing conversations with my graduate students, with my collaborators, how we define entertainment education, because I might be a little bit hardcore, and because I believe in knowing the distinctions between entertainment education and something else that looks similar and sounds similar, would help really optimizing the potential of the strategies, the communication strategies behind the scene. So the clear purpose, the elaborate collaboration, and the in-depth rigorous research every step of the way. There are certain processes you need to implement it. And so it's different from, some of the colleagues I've been talking to in Hollywood, what they call, the newer term in the last year is called social impact entertainment. You might have a movie, like say, Don't Look Up. People say, oh, that's entertainment education. Would it qualify? I'm not sure. By my definition, I would call it social impact entertainment, but I wouldn't call it entertainment education. So I might be a little bit more sort of hardcore and strict about what I would define as entertainment or qualify as entertainment education because of the work and the insights, the understanding I have from the field-based work. But, I can understand why certain people would want to use a term like entertainment education just to embrace and welcome folks who thought, I did not know entertainment media could be used for pro-social causes. And that sounds like a really fascinating idea. I'd like to do entertainment education, even though it might be a little bit loosely defined than, the way I would have defined it.
So do you think that social impact education will replace entertainment education when it comes to certain issues?
No, I don't think so. I think I encourage industry professionals to have these kind of conversations. This is December last year, so December 2023. I was at this conference in LA called Impact Plus Profit. So this was organized by SIE Society, so Social Impact Entertainment Society. There's a whole network. And infrastructure they're building, connecting people across different disciplines. And so I was talking about collaboration, this kind of a metaphor from my dear Dutch friend, colleague, and mentor, Martin Bowman, who studied collaboration in entertainment education in the late 1990s and publishing her dissertation and went on to, extend that work. And she used the metaphors of turtles and peacocks. So the turtles representing health professionals who have all the knowledge as sort of the content expertise. But, it needs to go through bureaucracy, it needs to be rigorous, move a little slowly, right? Then, for example, the fast-moving entertainment industry professionals. So in her original work, it was television writers and producers considering maybe a health storyline. And so, they tend to look like a glamorous, they want to be dramatic, to get attention. And, so the way, these different people, in creative media entertainment media industry versus in, say, public health sector or in academia, the way they think, the way they operate, their work can be very, very different. So she was talking about how you can bring these different people together and make it work. Because that is one of the most essential elements of how entertainment education strategies and projects can work. You have to be willing to listen and to learn from each other and have that genuine curiosity to want to make something work and work together. And so I was telling the version of the story and talking about where we are, and it's beyond turtles and peacocks in the digital social media age at this conference. And I said, it is great. Like we're in Hollywood, we're in LA, and we're all in the same room. This is exactly what we need more of. So do I care if we call it entertainment education or social impact entertainment? Not in that particular case, because we need to foster these kind of dialogues and collaborations more. And when I present sort of what the definition, I often kind of put it on a spectrum where maybe entertainment education is a bit more rigorous, and it historically comes from also developmental field. Maybe social impact entertainment is more on the industry, more kind of the developed communities context. It's a little bit loose, but still has its own benefit in terms of the power of celebrities, of certain funding, investment. So I think it's not an either or. I think, people need to reach out to each other, have these kind of conversations like what we have, and figure out what would be mutually beneficial and have that, for us to accomplish the common goal in terms of, in our case, accelerating climate solutions. In other cases, could be other complex and related social and health issues.
Mm-hmm. This book is also about solutions. And so what have you learned about communicating solutions with the public?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge for climate change because there are so many solutions that people get stuck on where to start. I hear in lecture halls, when someone calls out from the back, but what can we do about it? There isn't really one quick short answer that somebody at the front of the room can yell back. They're in a public health intervention like vaccination. The intervention behavior can be fairly specific. And, same with a sexually transmitted infection prevention program, which we mentioned earlier. But with climate, there are so many entry points. There isn't a one-size-fits-all model. Individual level responses, like taking public transit or using energy-efficient appliances in your home, is just the tip of the answer. And most public-facing, non-governmental organization campaigns start and end with individual actions. I think there's a lot of space where we can explore what collective action looks like. And even within the collective action visualizations that I've seen, I feel like the one that comes up most often is protest images, people marching together holding signs. And as a science illustrator, I really don't think that's an effective answer, because a bunch of people marching around is not taking the multitude of different actions that we need to actually mitigate climate change. I feel like a better answer is, again, if you have stories that show multiple characters in multiple actions from the same setting, you can show one person taking each of those actions easily and still jump to some of the more collective action responses, like engaging constructively with legislators. Having worked a little bit with legislative offices myself, I think that there's a place to show visualizations of collaborative work with them. Sometimes they really do want to help, and working to figure out where they're stuck, or to show community support for legislation that is climate positive is a really valuable resource. The Yale program on climate change communication and the George Mason program on climate change communication have fairly in-depth research at this point showing that, at least for American audiences, most people do want to see government officials take more effective action. And I don't see enough of that on screen. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities for us showing multiple viewpoints. And also, there was to divulge down a little path here, I remember there was a couple of elections ago, there were a couple of trailers that showed how to vote. There was misconception around, like, physically, how do you vote where you live? Or how to get to the polls, overcoming common challenges, which, especially for demographically diverse audiences, sometimes really important information. And so getting into some of those technical pieces of information and showing not just the challenges, but how people overcome them as the positive outlier examples on screen, really getting into that can provide just so many pathways for how to participate in solutions. I also want to take just a moment to talk about the CLEAN network, which stands for the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network, because as a community of practice, they're already exploring what climate education looks like over a wide array of both formal and informal education resources, including trade association education programs like building updates and renewable energy installation. I see my job as a science communicator as helping people to do that kind of work and help improve the visualization of what's already going on. I don't have to reinvent any of that. I just have to show what people are already doing.
Yes, these are great examples. Thank you. Are you planning any virtual or in-person events around your book?
Yeah, a little bit. As time allows, Helen and I have a list, and the individual chapter authors have been sending suggestions. And as everyone's able, I think we've all been chipping in. And
Emily and I discussed the possibilities of some kind of celebration and then sort of a further follow-up, opportunities. We actually did work with one of the chapter authors to apply for an NSF grant. And this is before we were going to turn into open access. But we were thinking, wouldn't that be nice if we could kind of coordinate to have the book launch could dovetail with another follow-up NSF-funded project to literally build this foster this community of practice. Unfortunately, we didn't get funded. And from what I've learned since the book release, I think this is how very often, the real world works is, individuals are talking to each other and based on their shared interests, and potential collaborations or follow-up projects are happening. And so it may not be a universal celebration of project with everybody who contributed to the book together, but it might take place in a different form, in a smaller group, and in a slightly different context. So it has its life of its own that we are trying our best to support in any way we can, including having this podcast recording and conversation with you.
So the book has been out now for 6 weeks, downloaded 23,000 times. Clearly people are downloading it and reading it. How do you hope the book will be used?
I'm hoping that the book serves as a jumping off point for building effective climate storytelling. I know that when I started this work, there was a whole range of research, but it wasn't all in one place. I'm hoping that it's both a consolidation of current best practices so that anybody starting off in the field doesn't have to start from scratch. I also hope that the examples that we've provided that are very concrete and very specific to a variety of different fields help build communities of practice so that people feel supported in engaging with each other in creating climate stories. I know that Catherine Hayhoe talks about just trying to get more the word climate into everything. Just talk about it, right? Is heard of her perspective. But I think we know that there are specific ways that are more effective than others. I don't think that all climate conversations are equal. And I think that one of the things that this book demonstrates with the agency framing about how helping people make short-term and then long-term iterative decisions and how to succeed at tasks that they want to succeed at can really help people participate effectively. My goal and my hope is that we reduce the amount of impact caused by climate change still. I still really strive for that in my work. I'm hoping that this helps people do that more effectively. I think that the choices that we make today and the efficiency with which we act shape our collective future.
I think some of the expected outcomes we talked about is already happening, like a conversation we're having right now. And I know there's also private conversations. Like I've co-authored 3 chapters in this book. We've had potential collaborators reaching out to me and my other co-authors regarding, sort of shared interests. And I'm sure there's a lot of similar discussions going on. So that's one way in terms of really using that as a springboard to connect people. So by reading, I've actually had several conversations with potential collaboration. People reading this is, this is exactly what we needed. I'm so glad that you have this book and that you have your chapter. There's a lot of resources and examples and stories you could share. So that's happening for sure. And we also heard, so in the industry, I know Emily was at a conference, Hollywood Climate Summit, with some colleagues, different organizations such as RARE, for example, and the NRDC is there, and talking about how this is making sort of an impact with the entertainment and media industry. I've also heard there's a lot of discussions with some of the bigger supporters, institutions behind the book project, hopefully in terms of larger funding initiatives and sort of maybe policy-oriented initiatives or sort of, at least this is useful with a publication like this. It could be useful for those kind of conversations at that level. And also I can see workshops on climate change and classes, like, there are all kinds of courses, be it in, environmental communication or sustainability, community engagement, media. So there's a lot of entry points in terms of how people could use the entire book or certain chapters, relevant chapters in sort of a teaching, in workshops, and or even use them as sort of supporting evidence for additional grant applications. So that's what I'm hoping.
Helen, both you and Emily have very busy academic careers. You are a communication scientist. You focused, as you've said, on the health field. You focus on behavior change and on social justice. Now that the book has been published and being enjoyed by so many people, what's next for you?
A major project for me right now is a book about entertainment education. So you mentioned the 2021 edited book by my colleagues, and there was more case studies. And that was the first one after a first major publication in 15 years or so. And so my colleague and mentor, Dr. Arvind Singhal, and I, we have a book contract. So we think this is time. And I actually have been teaching this subject matter at the undergraduate level, so freshman introduction and upper undergraduate level and graduate level, graduates for master's and PhD students for many years. And so they really helped me thinking about different theories, methodologies, technologies, storytelling, narrative kind of communication sort of mechanisms, and to sort of keep moving with the field, so to speak. So we felt compelled to write a book. So we're not editing, we're writing a book together right now, sort of an updated version of where we are and what can be done. So some of the cutting edge sort of approaches, strategies we will highlight, stories we can tell from our recent projects, but also where we're going. So that's quite exciting. For me, it's a full circle moment. I've been a student and a researcher in this field for many, many years. And to be able to work on a project that I dreamed about when I was getting my PhD candidacy many, many years ago. And now to be able to write a book on it as sort of where we are, the sort of state of art, a version of the subject matter is a quite an exciting opportunity.
Emily, you have a busy academic career, and you are a science communicator, a children's book author, and a behavioral scientist. What's next for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So one of the chapters in the book, titled Mapping Out Our Future, Using Geospatial Tools and Visual Aids to Achieve Climate Empowerment in the United States, really touches on how to use geospatial mapping to improve the visualization of what climate action looks like. And so I'm prototyping that. I'm working with the Association of Science and Technology Centers, which is a professional organization supporting museums and zoos nationally. And we're expanding a GIS prototype to build real-time systemization to improve the reference material for story creation across media types. We started the work regionally in the Central Coast of California, and then I had a colleague, Aman, repeat our experiment with her dissertation. And now working with ASTC, we're trying to basically create a representative map of what climate solutions look like across the United States to bring it back to rhythm and glue.
You can learn more about Emily's project titled Rhythm and Glue in Chapter 7 of the new storytelling book.
When we were creating the visuals for that, one of the things that really sunk into me was just how much reference material it took and how hard it was to find linked resources. And so I think that this prototype can hopefully shortcut some of both of those for creators, storytellers of all media types. That's what I'm going to be working on for the next year.
I would love to end this conversation on a note that maybe to emphasize the importance and the power of good stories. My mentor and I, we often talk about, how really good stories can take people to places that they've never been, right? So in the work we have been doing in entertainment education, we use that in terms of that really thoughtful collaboration behind the scene and based on research and evidence to make sure there are so many opportunities for change that can be embedded in the narrative elements and related experience. So that healthy alternatives or effective alternative solutions may be presented, but not preachy. They can be compelling so that people feel like I can maybe at least temporarily put myself in the shoes of a different type of group and understand where they're coming from. Or I can at least see how something could work and what would be the consequence of that, and could that work in my community, in my world. And also sort of what we often do in that type of storytelling is to use the characters, use particular themes and issues in the specific storylines or plots to connect to useful resources. So, I mean, that's the, immediate step where people say, oh, like, I love this character or I love this storyline and I want to find out more about it, right? So what you do is you talk about it, Tania, guess what? I saw last night, in this story, I love this character, but in there, what happened to this character? So you get people talking about things they normally would kind of reject, would kind of feel very hesitant to talk about these, taboo and complex issues. And also information seeking, right? Like, now I didn't know it was possible. So maybe I don't have to be the one person to solve this, climate crisis, but there are other things perhaps I can find that's closer to my reach. And if I can see somebody or some groups that have been doing this all along that I can relate to, and I would feel much better empowered to try it out, to consider it, right? So there's a lot of things we've learned in the last few decades of the work in entertainment education to say that if we can use that purposeful, intentional storytelling behind the scene, and through that process to create conditions for positive social change, we can indeed bring people together first, and also bring people to the places they normally would not have considered possible. And that is the true power of entertainment education through storytelling, through entertainment media, to address very, very complicated and seemingly intractable issues like a climate crisis. So I really wanted to emphasize that, and I would encourage any of your readers to check out the specific chapters and a lot of the examples and resources we've highlighted in there, and reach out to others like what you're doing, and to have these kind of really interesting and useful, conversations. And who knows, this might lead to something else that's really in action that can bring about some positive social impact. So I really thank you for this opportunity to chat.
To learn more about Emily, Helen, and the book Storytelling to Accelerate Climate Solutions, visit the show notes for this episode. You'll be able to download a free copy of the book or any chapter of your choosing through the link in the show notes. Thank you for joining us today. See you next time.